A young scientist named Donner was watching archival footage of a space mission alongside his father. It's clear that their relationship is strained, and Donner's father disapproves of his astronaut career. In a flashback, Donner was on a Mars mission. In a desperate moment, Donner left two teammates behind, a decision that haunts him and invites speculation about whether it was a calculated move or a panic-induced mistake. Donner had a brief romance with Zoe Barnes before realizing she was also an astronaut. Their relationship was further complicated when Zoe became pregnant, something neither of them planned due to Donner's vasectomy, which as it turns out failed. Zoe chose to terminate the pregnancy using medication to continue pursuing her career, and she now harbors resentment toward Donner for lying about the vasectomy. Initially, Donner isn't part of the primary mission crew due to the Mars incident instead of serving as an alternate. The crew prepares for their Venus mission by orbiting Earth to run system checks, and during this phase, Zoe overhears what she believes is a baby crying. Though dismissed by the others as the ship settles, Zoe remains unsettled. Back on Earth, the crew faces an unexpected anomaly. Both AJ and Rowley, members of the primary crew, display identical heart arrhythmias. This medical issue forces them to withdraw from the mission, paving the way for Donner to join the team. While Rowley adjusts his new role in mission control, AJ spirals into despair, questioning his place in the universe. In a dramatic moment, he attempts a spacewalk, seemingly prepared to end his life. Donner intervenes, convincing him to return, and with Donner now aboard, the mission finally launches. During a media interview, a reporter questions why two astronauts, AJ and Rowley, have returned early. Mike Goss addresses the concern, explaining that both experienced minor irregularities during the mission. In a flashback, Donner and his friend sit at a restaurant, chatting idly about Zoe, who is seated alone at a bar, sipping a drink and keeping to herself. At one point, Donner excuses himself to use the restroom but overhears Zoe on a phone call with her mother, and her mother's tone was firm, suggesting that she move on and find a new boyfriend. Zoe abruptly ends the call when she realizes someone was nearby, and confronted by Donner as he returns, she grows defensive when he teases her about the conversation. Their exchange quickly turns heated. In the present, focusing on preparations for the Venus landing, the team tests a new pressure suit by placing Zoe in the airlock and simulating the harsh Venusian environment. The controlled test was supposed to be routine, and as the test began, safety protocols inexplicably failed, and Zoe was ejected into space. Thankfully though, Donner had the foresight to use a rope to tie her to the ship, preventing her from drifting away entirely. However, the rope was 500 meters long, leaving Zoe dangerously far from the ship and rapidly losing air due to a leak in the suit. The team scrambles to reel her back in, creating a tense, drawn-out rescue sequence. In a flashback, Donner steps outside the bar and catches up with Zoe. With a playful tone, he compliments her, saying she looks striking without her sunglasses. He then hands her the card she left behind at the bar, and their conversation takes a lighthearted turn, eventually leading to an intimate moment between them. Later, during a training session in the water, Zoe puts herself in danger to assist Wesson, who struggles during the swimming drill. Her bold action catches the attention of the instructors and fellow trainees, highlighting her determination despite the risks. Zoe was finally pulled back into the mission, narrowly surviving the harrowing ordeal. The incident raises questions about the reliability of their equipment and the possibility of unseen forces meddling with the mission. Despite these challenges, the crew presses on, determined to succeed. As Ted reaches for the door, a vivid hallucination overtakes him, and he imagines himself stepping onto the desolate surface of Mars, reliving the haunting memory of a catastrophic event. Back on Earth, Ted calls his wife Eve Shaw, who doubles as the mission's second-in-command. Eve, cold and enigmatic, urges Ted to return to Pod 4 and face his vision, insisting Beta is trying to communicate. Ted, emotionally adrift, continues to shirk his responsibilities, leaving the rest of the crew to figure things out while their leader acts erratically. Meanwhile, Paula Morales struggles with severe space sickness, punctuating her scenes with unnecessary Spanish phrases and dramatic vomiting. Her situation escalates to dehydration, and meanwhile, while she was suffering in her room, Wesson unexpectedly enters her room, which makes her mad, and she tells him that he must get her permission before entering to the room and commands him to get out. Back in the present, Zoe and Donner work on preparing the lander for their upcoming Venus mission, and their close quarters collaboration reignites tensions from their past romantic relationship, while the lander's computer malfunctions, revealing Beta's interface. The ground crew blocks Donner's attempt to manually investigate, adding to the growing sense of foreboding. The flashbacks culminate in a strip club, where Nadia takes things too far, removing her shirt and giving Donner a lap dance. The sequence attempts to be edgy, but ends up being creepy and nonsensical when Donner sees Zoe leaving the club. In the present, Rolly and AJ engage in a heartfelt discussion about the crew's situation, and AJ struggles with a sense of displacement, confesses that he no longer feels like part of the team, and sensing his doubt, Rolly offers words of reassurance, reminding him of his value, and emphasizing that his contributions as an astronaut remain vital to the crew's success, even from a distance. Ted's mental state worsens as the Mars hallucination weighs on him, and Rolly confronts Ted in a last-ditch attempt to snap him out of his funk, and he tells him that he is hiding for something, and acts like it's something like betrayal, and reminds him that Ted is there instead of Rolly, and he must take the responsibilities. Surprisingly, Ted resumes his command duties, and afterward the final twist comes from the medical team on Earth, and they discover that the astronaut's DNA is being altered, converging into something new. As dawn breaks, the crew gathers for breakfast, maintaining a composed focus, and Eve gently checks on Ted, who brushes off her concern, noting only the storm. Later, AJ leaves for the bar, triggering a memory of challenging, outdated information during one of Donner's lectures, much to Donner's irritation. In the present, a critical system failure arises, and Donner urges mission control to find AJ, but Goss insisted the crew must resolve it themselves. Meanwhile, Wesson and Paula were stranded in zero gravity due to the malfunctioning motorized arm. A system analyst links the failure to inconsistencies in graphing data, but AJ, sidelined by surgery, couldn't assist, leaving the crew to face the crisis alone. The spaceship's control panels intermittently flash with an unexpected light, casting an unsettling glow through the corridors. Amidst this, Donner steps out for a solitary walk, seeking something quiet, and elsewhere, tensions rise between Nadia and Zoe, who find themselves locked in a heated argument. And outside the ship, Donner experiences a disorienting hallucination. In his mind, he sees the faces of those that he had once left behind on Mars, reliving the guilt of abandonment. The haunting visions make him feel as though he's trapped there once again, and lost in the delusion, he fails to respond to the crew's call over the radio. Drawn deeper into the hallucination, he begins following two ghostly figures of astronauts through the barren landscape of his mind. Eventually, the spell breaks, and Donner regains his sense of reality, making his way back to the ship. In a flashback, Ted and Jen were seated at a bar, engaged in what starts as a lighthearted conversation. Rolly occupies a nearby chair, half listening, and Jen subtly suggests that Ted might need companionship, even hinting that he should consider spending the evening with someone. Her words strike a nerve, and Ted, irritated, argues back before abruptly walking away, leaving the conversation unresolved. Back in the present, Ivram battles his own hallucinations, and Jen appears in his vision, soothing him as he struggles with the intensity of the experience. Confused and alarmed, he admits that this has never happened to him before, and Jen, calm and composed, reassures him, promising to keep his vulnerability a secret just between the two of them. Zoe, frustrated, suggests abandoning the mission, but Donner firmly dismisses the idea, insisting every problem has a solution. Nadia pragmatically points out that the issue is a hardware malfunction, and after some thought, Ted supports Donner, urging the team to focus on repairs. Determined, Donner isolates himself and discovers the cause of the light fluctuations, an overlooked circuit trigger. He repairs it, restoring system stability, and the crew regroups and decides to expedite AJ's return, prioritizing his expertise for future challenges. Ted urges Eve to reveal the truth about Beta, but Eve dismisses the idea, insisting it's unnecessary. Frustrated, Ted cuts the conversation short and hangs up, And meanwhile, Donner and Nadia, paired together on an assignment, work closely. Nadia flirts with Donner, staying near him and questioning why things feel different in space compared to Earth, and she briefly mentions Zoe, but Donner dismisses her comments, stating that he doesn't want to complicate the mission. Nadia then brings up Sharon, triggering a flashback for Donner, where he recalls a casual friend with benefits agreement he once made with Sharon during a smooth conversation. As Donner works on repairing panels, he experiences hallucinations, imagining the panels covered in dust. However, he hides this from Ted and continues as if nothing is wrong, and elsewhere, Jen was upset that Rowley was judging her 6-year-old mission, despite his own mission lasting just 34 days. When Zoe inquires about the reason for Rowley's judgment, Jen avoids answering, and later, when Rowley calls, Jen refuses to talk and hangs up on him. In a flashback, Donner tells Sharon that he won't date astronauts, but Sharon, defensive and insistent, pushes him to reconsider. Despite Donner revealing his true feelings, Sharon struggles to accept him, and at mission control, Eve demands unrestricted access to the spaceship's cockpit recordings, and upon reviewing the footage, she uncovers crucial moments the crew had experienced earlier. At a bar, Donner unexpectedly meets Zoe's mother, and she inquires about his connection to Zoe, and he reassures her that they know each other. Zoe's mom shares details about Zoe's research at a prestigious school and cryptically predicts a complicated relationship between Donner and Zoe. She observes Donner as a man burdened by his past, and later, reading Zoe's journal, she discovers that Zoe is pregnant. Ted and Donner, as their conversation escalates into an argument, Ted, visibly frustrated, declares that something feels fundamentally off about their mission. He insists that they shouldn't even be out here in the first place, arguing that their place is back on Earth with their families. Donner, suspicious of Ted's sudden conviction, presses him further, guessing that he knows something that he doesn't. But then Ted refuses to tell him the truth. Donner checks the panels but continues to see dust due to his hallucinations, despite Ted assuring him that they're fine. Ted grows suspicious when Donner gets a positive reading, and Ted later tells Eve about Donner's hallucinations, but admits he hasn't addressed it. Eve suggests telling him, but Ted decides to wait until the next day. In a flashback, Donner was teaching when Zoe arrives late, and he rearranges the teams for discussion, assigning Zoe to a new group. However, she quietly switches back to her original spot, and Donner notices but decides not to confront her. In the present, Avram struggles to treat Donner, his hands shaking due to a back condition that worsened after leaving Earth. And meanwhile, AJ's return to mission control boosts the group's morale, and Goss, however, swiftly assigns him a critical task, emphasizing urgency as the mission continues. Jen asks Zoe for help in the lab and shows her a rabbit embryo, but Zoe dismisses it, showing that she didn't like it. In a flashback, a dislocated shoulder is treated during a lesson for astronaut students, and Zoe later reveals to Jen that she took a pill to prevent pregnancy. Meanwhile, in another room, a doctor orders Paula and Wesson to monitor a patient's vitals every 15 minutes. In the present, Evren battles a hallucination alone, while Zoe grows irritated with Jen over her insistence on keeping the embryo. Their argument is cut short when an alarm sounds and Paula has injured her hand and blood floats eerily in zero gravity. The crew rushes to help, with Evram arriving to perform treatment. However, mid-surgery, Evram's hallucinations return, paralyzing his ability to act. With the crew's assistance, he manages to regain focus and successfully saves Paula. Jen finally confesses to Donner and Ted that Evram's strange behavior is caused by severe hallucinations, recounting past incidents that she witnessed. Ted, furious, reprimands her for keeping it a secret, calling it a major risk to the entire crew. In a flashback, Zoe is treated in an emergency room after heavily bleeding, and AJ assures Donner that she's stable and the doctors have stopped the bleeding, but he firmly adds that he isn't responsible for her condition. In the present, Evram opens up to Donner and Ted, revealing the scar on his back and admitting that he'd been struggling with full-blown hallucinations. Eve enters a dark room and slips into a vivid hallucination. Later, she tells Ted that it felt like a pulsing sensation, more intense than usual. She also informs him about Paula's low-grade fever and advises monitoring the crew and himself. Their conversation is briefly interrupted by Ted's son unexpectedly arriving. During a casual conversation, Donner experiences another hallucination, mistaking a helmet for something else. Soon after, Nadia envisions a man, leaving Paula and Wesson alarmed. In a flashback, Ted playfully teases Eve for her attention to detail, joking about forgetting his belt. They plan to meet again as Eve shows interest in his experiences on Mars. In the present, Zoe hears the sound of a baby crying during hallucination. When Donner asks if she's okay, she dismisses his concern, pretending everything is fine. Meanwhile, at Mission Control, a doctor notices Zoe's heart rate spiking and reports that Ted, Paula, and Zoe are all showing symptoms of low-grade fever. Eve, also experiencing hallucinations, adds to the doctor's confusion as they try to piece together the cause. At Mission Control, the doctor reveals that a contamination in the inhabitant environment has triggered a chemical reaction, causing the hallucinations amongst the astronauts. Goss and the commercial team were unsure of how to proceed, unwilling to risk the crew's lives, but divided on the best course of action. Meanwhile, Nadia, lost in her hallucination, follows an imagined figure until Ephraim intervenes, escorting her to the airlock to help her regain focus. He later reports that all crew members except Jen and Wesson are exhibiting low-grade fevers tied to the hallucinations. The astronauts prepare to enter the airlock, their pathway to space, when Paula, while recording, hallucinates and sees her dog. Overcome with emotion, she follows the vision, only to see her dog dying. She breaks down and Ephraim, confused, asks who she's grieving. As he tries to calm her, he succumbs to a hallucination himself, panicking when Paula's face distorts in his mind. Elsewhere, Zoe and Donner also struggle with vivid hallucinations, while Ted becomes paralyzed by his own, seeing a red storm and visions of his wife Eve. At Mission Control, the silence from the crew raises alarm, creating intense tension. Finally, Donner responds, breaking the uncertainty, and Goss quickly orders the astronauts to return to the ship. Though they comply, Donner and Nadia continue to suffer from hallucinations, but conceal their symptoms from the others. Nadia, still feeling uneasy, approaches Ted to ask what's going on, insisting that something isn't right. However, Ted remains tight-lipped, maintaining a stoic demeanor and refusing to disclose any details to her. In a flashback, Ted and Donner are seen walking together, discussing Eve, and Ted defends her actions. But Donner seemingly disagrees, stating bluntly that he doesn't trust her. Later, Donner encounters Zoe in a bathing area and brings up the events of the previous night. Zoe acknowledges his comment but firmly states that she is a rule follower and not a rule breaker. Meanwhile, Ted talks privately with Jen, but their conversation is interrupted when Donner barges in, ordering everyone to refocus and stay on task. Shortly after, Goss addressed the entire team, warning them that even a single mistake during the mission could lead to death. He stresses the importance of following orders without hesitation or deviation. Back in the present, Donner confronts AJ, demanding to know what's going on. AJ, visibly uncomfortable, avoids giving a direct answer and instead urges Donner to follow Mission Control's orders, as there's no alternative at this point. Unsatisfied, Donner later speaks to Zoe, confiding that Mission Control is hiding something from them, and he reminds Zoe of her tendency to follow strict rules, but before she can respond, she experiences a hallucination, a baby's cry echoing in her mind. Startled, she follows the sound and insists that Donner come with her to investigate, and together they head to the bay, where Zoe hears the cry again and notices a button triggering the pod's rotation. Their actions alerts Mission Control, and AJ informs Donner that they're monitoring their movements, and ignoring the warning, Donner continues investigating the bay, but they were unable to open it. Goss, observing the situation, orders Ted to intervene and stop Donner and Zoe, and Ted arrives and confronts Donner, leading to a heated argument. Donner, visibly frustrated, reminds Ted of the last mission when the crew nearly lost their lives, placing the blame squarely on Eve's leadership. Their argument is abruptly interrupted by the blaring of alarms, signaling that the proton sensor panels have activated, and this activation triggers chaos in both Mission Control and aboard the spacecraft, and it indicates a dangerous radiation threat. The crew scrambles to reach the bunker for safety, and most manage to get inside, but Zoe and Jen lag behind. Donner refuses to leave them, waiting anxiously as the situation grows increasingly critical, and despite their efforts, Zoe and Jen fail to make it to the bunker in time. After the crisis, Donner manages to locate Zoe and Jen and is relieved to find them unharmed. Shortly after, Goss reveals that the entire incident was a planned drill designed to test the crew's readiness under pressure. The crew finally spots the mysterious object responsible for their hallucinations, though none of them can identify it. Speculation runs high as they attempt to make sense of what they're seeing, but no one is certain, and Mission Control is equally baffled until Goss, the mission manager, steps in to provide clarity. He identifies the object as Beta and informs the crew that they've now entered security level 12, adding an air of urgency and secrecy. As the crew grapples with this revelation, they're startled by an unexplained sound reverberating through space. From a distance, Venus comes into view, its glowing silhouette adding to the surreal atmosphere. In a flashback, Goss briefs Mission Control on their ambitious project, emphasizing the need to leave a strong impression. He confirms the mission will span 6 years, covering 7 planets, and privately, Goss warns Donner and Ted to avoid any interaction with the press, firmly stating that they're banned from speaking publicly. Eve, attempting to defuse the tension, suggests giving other teams a chance. Frustrated, Ted argues that their focus must be on ensuring the mission's success, and Eve reassures them that their leadership capabilities before departing. At a subsequent press conference, Goss reveals a startling detail. 15 years ago, a mysterious radio signal was detected from Mars, followed by a second signal originating from NASA. Both signals suggest the presence of something inexplainable, and Eve reveals that she lost her family to Hurricane Ophelia as a child, later joining the Nazca to supervise relief efforts after a catastrophic event. During this time, she recalls a simple violin song from her childhood that she now hears at night. Determined to trace the sound, she climbs a mountain and begins digging, but is interrupted by a helicopter. Questioned by police for violating the area's rules, Eve explains that she was searching for the music she heard. Initially skeptical, the officers join her search and they dig, and the music abruptly stops, and a powerful ray bursts from the ground, Beta, and the police warn Eve to keep the discovery secret and order her to leave. Zoe stands in front of Beta while Donner advises her not to focus too much to the radiation, and she feels uncertain, and Donner is equally puzzled by the situation. And Wesson admits that he has never had a hallucination, prompting Evram to suggest that it might be tied to guilt. He then points out that the Beta object holds all their guilt-related records. One by one, everyone confesses to feeling guilty except for Paula, who connects her situation to religion. Meanwhile, Eve reassures the group that they're all connected to Beta, and there's no way to escape this connection. And meanwhile, in Mission Control, the commercial team was holding a meeting. The doctor expresses concern about the crew, fearing the side effects of Beta, but her suggestion is dismissed. Ted and Donner find themselves in a heated argument, frustrated that everything unfolding is beyond their understanding. Ted, recalling events from a decade ago, tells Donner to let go of the past and move on, especially when it comes to Sharon. He urges him to forget about the situation and to not let it cloud their judgment moving forward. In a flashback, Donner was with Sharon, complimenting her on her beauty, and she responds by sharing that she's been thinking about a childhood friend. Their conversation flows easily, filled with warmth, and just as Donner leans for a kiss, another crew member unexpectedly interrupts, breaking the moment. In the present, Nadia was seething with frustration over everything that's transpired, and Evram tries to calm her down, explaining that the plan has shifted and that she shouldn't let it bother her. He admits that the plan keeps evolving, and still irritated, Nadia demands to know what Beta is and why they aren't receiving any updates from Mission Control. Meanwhile, the tension between Ted and Donner remains unresolved, with both of them standing at odds, glaring at each other. Jen was in a bad mood when Rolly surprises her, hiding a ring beneath the table. Her mood shifts from annoyance to anger, but Rolly keeps apologizing for his actions that he did previously, and just as their conversation grows tense, Zoe walks in. She tells Jen that she had been helping Paula from the landing, and in the midst of their conversation, a strange sound from Beta interrupts them, and they continue talking. Undeterred, Jen, however, was blunt about Beta, telling Zoe that she refuses to see or touch it. On Earth, a reporter presses one of the crew members about the upcoming election festivities, and the crew member responds briefly, stating that it's their choice. Undeterred, the journalist continues with tough questions despite the crew member's attempt to walk away. The crew member reassures him, emphasizing that the astronauts are well trained and will be fine. Donner tells Zoe that they won't make it to Venus without him, expressing concerns about Walker's presence in the rover, explaining that the mission had initially rejected him for a reason. He also reveals that Sharon had been hallucinating about a traumatic incident from her childhood, and Zoe, however, reassures him firmly, stating that she will continue the journey to Venus with Paula and that she doesn't need his protection. Later, Paula goes live with the broadcasting channel, and after a smooth start, her tone suddenly shifts and she begins speaking harshly. Meanwhile, Goss was more focused on the mission than the well-being of the crew, and back on Earth, Rowley accidentally hits a child while riding. Ted tries to reassure Eve that the crew was holding up well, but his frustration is evident. Eve, undeterred, reminds him that they stand on the verge of making history, yet Ted cannot shake his concerns. Meanwhile, Gross plays a visit to Rowley, who is being held in prison after hitting a child with a car. Gross informs him that his blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit at the time of the incident and warns him of the severity of the situation. He explains that the child is currently in a coma, and if the child does not survive, Rowley could face a 25-year prison sentence. Zoe, noticing the tension weighing on Donner, steps in to assist him with the landing preparations. Although she appears visibly exhausted, she brushes off his concern, admitting that she prefers to stay occupied rather than take rest like she really needs. Together, they run a landing simulation with Nadia, but the attempt ends in failure. Donner, clearly frustrated yet resolute, immediately demands another attempt, unwilling to accept anything less than success. Later, Zoe picks up on Jen's distracted demeanor and decides to confront her, sensing that something is amiss. She directly asks Jen what's troubling her, even bringing up her boyfriend Rowley to prod for answers. Jen, trying to maintain composure, downplays her emotion and reluctantly admits that she hasn't spoken to Rowley in some time. In a flashback, Jen and Ted were shown in a private and vulnerable moment, sharing an intimate night together that highlights the complex layers of their relationship. Meanwhile, at a bar, Donner casually approaches Zoe and asks if she's alone, and seizing the opportunity to stir some jealousy, Zoe mentions that she's there with Wesson. However, Donner remains unfazed, responding with an easygoing compliment about their choice to play darts, even though it's clear that Zoe doesn't particularly enjoy the game. His lack of reaction leaves her somewhat disappointed, and Jen, still wrestling with her emotions and uncertainty about Rowley, decides to contact Mission Control in hopes of finding him. A friend at Mission Control informs her that Rowley isn't there, but is instead attending a meeting at the AirTrend headquarters, and this revelation leaves Jen feeling more unsettled as Rowley was currently unreachable. Paula, feeling frustrated, responds sharply when Avram asks about her situation. She tells him that his attitude seems to be testing her faith, as he clearly doesn't have any of his own, and walks away from him. After several attempts, Donner successfully completes the simulation landing. However, Nadia is once again affected by hallucinations, struggling with the overwhelming effects. In a flashback, the crew was at a bar, relaxing and having a good time, and in a heated exchange, Claire snaps at Avram, accusing him of having no right to judge a woman based on her personal relationships with a man. The tension rises, but as the conversation continues, it gradually shifts and ends on a more peaceful and understanding note. Afterwards, Zoe and Donner were on the mission, preparing to exit the spaceship, and at first everything seems to be going smoothly, with the readings being positive. However, as time passes, they begin to encounter problems, and tensions rise as both the crew and Mission Control panic, fearing the worst. Despite the challenges, Zoe and Donner manage to successfully land on Venus, overcoming the obstacles in their path. But while Zoe was in command, she suffers a hallucination again. Zoe leads the way, but suddenly she hears the sound of a baby crying, a hallucination that disturbs her. Donner tries to reassure her, reminding her that they're on Venus and that it's not real. The rest of the crew remains unaware of her guilt, as it's tied to something from her past. Ted, sensing the situation escalating, commands Donner to bring Zoe back. Despite Donner's attempts to explain that there's no baby, Zoe refuses to listen and dismisses his concerns. Later, Jen calls Zoe privately and she urges her to turn back, explaining that the suit is only certified for 20 minutes. Jen also tries to convince Zoe that her baby was gone, but Zoe struggles to trust her, torn between her feelings and the reality of the situation. Meanwhile, Zoe experiences another hallucination, this time seeing her baby. However, in reality, it's Gamma and not her child. As she starts to head back, she tells Donner that she's coming with their baby boy, and this shocks him as he had no idea that she was pregnant, let alone that she had previously aborted a child. He's left reeling from the revelation, unsure of how to process what she just shared. Zoe struggles to make her way back, but the high temperature slows her down, making it difficult to move quickly. With only 5 meters left, the surface of her left arm begins to fail, and she then goes on to collapse. Despite the setback, she pushes herself back to the cage, managing to get inside the spacecraft. However, she was severely injured and half of her body was burned, and other parts of her body were damaged from the extreme conditions that she endured. But nevertheless, Donner doesn't hesitate to kiss her.